A few people have asked how the rice is doing, so we'll do an update on that. We've got it in 3 different places. Most of it's in the paddy field, which is behind me, but we've also got some in the greenhouse. We'll have a look at that in a minute, and we've got some in the house on a south-facing windowsill. Now we're growing 2 types. We got Duborskian, which is a Ukrainian / Russian variety, and we have Hayayuki, which is a Japanese variety. Now the Duborskian variety is an upland rice, so it doesn't actually need to be grown in a paddy field. It doesn't need them wet conditions. But the Hayayuki, but you know, it can be grown in a paddy. But the Hayayuki is a traditional paddy rice. Now, we've been in touch with someone called Colin since we started doing this, who's successfully grown both of these varieties in Britain before. Not this far north, but he has grown these varieties here. And he found that the Hayayuki came out into seed heads earlier than the Duborskian did. So we've got a few of them on the go. We grew a packet out, and we had about 10-20 packets, 10-20 plants. I think it wasn't the best viability, but the seed that did grow has done well. So it's definitely just a viability of the seed issue. If what we've seen this year would suggest that next year we'll grow the Hayayuki in the paddy to see how that does, but we'll have a look at the Duborskian. Now, in case you haven't seen our other videos, you can see the ducks here. The duck pond water is controlled by these swivel monks, so I can tip that down and dump that pond water, which is intermittently full of duck manure, into the paddy field. So that comes out through the pipe, which comes out into the paddy field there. It was flooded a few days ago. We flood it intermittently. If you keep a paddy field permanently flooded, you tend to produce quite a bit of methane, which is a major contributor of climate change. So we're trying to minimise that. But you can see that it's starting to tiller, starting to branch out. All of these are individual plants. So you can see they're quite short. It's still quite an exposed site. But you can see the new growth is still nice and green, and you can see lower down there's multiple shoots coming from each of them. Some of them have done really well, and then the odd one's been hammered flat by the weather. But that's okay. Over time we'll be selecting by choosing the healthiest each year for plants that will do well with the wind that we get here. And of course, as the shelter belt comes up, that'll make a difference as well and give us much more protected conditions. These were planted as seed on the 7th of April. We kept them inside for a little while, and they were planted out on about the 17th of May, I think it was. At the time they were, tiny little skinny spindly things. Have a look at one of the other videos that'll show them being planted out. In fact, I'll put a link to that in the description. Really quite pleased with them so far. They've done well. You can see where when it's dried out all the soil's cracked. That's useful as it dries out and the moisture leaves the ground, being taken up by the wind, and also the plants using it. The mud cracks, and as the soil dries out, it draws oxygen down, and it's really good for the roots of the plant. There's been a lot of work done in recent years on ways of producing rice more sustainably, and the SRI method is one of the main results of that. And the SRI method involves intermittent flooding rather than keeping rice permanently in paddies, and also doing individual plants with more space between them rather than clumps as they were grown. Now at the end here, where it's higher and drier, and the weeds are a lot worse because it hasn't been flooded as much, we grew some out like it used to be grown in clumps, and you can see overall that's about 5 or 6 plants there. You're not going to have as much yield apparently. There's 5 or 6 plants grown under that method. Some of them are looking pretty well. You can see some of them are up to about 8 or 9 inches, and it's still quite early in the year yet. So again, we'll take seed this year from the healthiest plants that have done well under the conditions that we've got. Twice I've added extra fertility as well as the duck water. They were looking a bit yellow for a while at first, so I put a load of bloodfish and bone, just trickled the load into the water as I as it flowed through the pipe, I just trickled it in a little bit at a time from my hand as the paddy get flooded, so it spread it more evenly. And the second time I just threw the odd handful in and spread it about. It's yeah, so it's doing quite well considering it's a really experimental crop here. We'll go to the greenhouse and have a look at the Hayayuki. So here we've got the coloured buckets. That's the Duborskian, same as we're growing outside in the paddy. And this is here just really as belt and braces, sort of insurance policy. So if a freak storm came through and took out the entire crop, we've still got some seed so we can experiment with it next year. It's done a little bit better than it has outside. It's just less mechanical, getting blown around, which means that of course it's pointing its solar panels, at the sun more regularly than anything can outside, and it's easier to fertilise. But the stuff in the black buckets is the Hayayuki. This is the Japanese variety that we're just experimenting with for the first time this year. But you can see how much more tillering it's done. There's a lot of stalks. Each of these are individual plants, each of these clumps. And that one you can see, for example, look at the amount of tillering. Oh, look at this one. That's all from one plant. That's amazing. So we'd probably take a seed from those varieties by preference. And you can see, look, it's just starting to come into flower there, look. So that's very early that this is coming into flower here. And even protected in the greenhouse. It doesn't need the greenhouse conditions to do well. But this is in all varieties that we've got. We've got some more inside. We'll come to them in a little while. But these are producing flower spikes. They're starting to put out the panicle earlier, more reliably than the Duborskian, which is about to start, but still the Hayayuki is just a bit further along. So an earlier finishing rice is pretty good. And the Hayayuki is a long grain rice, which I prefer the texture of, to be honest. So yeah, I think we're definitely going to look at doing Hayayuki, at least in a section of paddy field next year, and see what we can do with that, truly outside. Because obviously being kept in the greenhouse isn't really representative of what it'll do outside. But we have been told that this particular variety looks like it lags behind at first, and then suddenly piles on a load and shoots up because it puts most of its energy at first into root production. So that should do us quite well, and that's really interesting. So I'll be interested to see how this does, because we've certainly got enough plants to give us good, reliable seed for a fairly significant planting next year. That's very cool. It's possibly the first rice grain to be formed in the Highlands this year. It's probably wider than that, but let's say we're on the side of caution. I don't want to say anything too bold, but that's very encouraging. Right, let's have a look at the ones that we've been growing in the house. And these are the plants that we've grown indoors. I've fetched them out where the light's better, just so you can have a proper look at them. But this is the Duborskian, the Ukrainian variety, and you can see just how much bigger it is, how much more aggressive. And you can see here, where are we? In there, that the seed head's just starting to form. There we go, just inside there. So that's starting to panicle out. So that's very cool. But have a look at the Hayayuki. See how much further along that is. Full-on seed head production, and this is very early. And it's not representative of what it would do outside. But you can see the pollen grains. Very cool. It's not representative of what it could do outside in a paddy, of course. It'd be a much stockier plant because it'd have the effects of wind. I just tied this up so it didn't snap when I was moving it around. Doesn't normally grow like that, but and again you can see, like this one here, just how much that's tilled out. All looking really well. So we're definitely going to experiment heavily with Hayayuki rice next year. So yeah, these were planted originally, all of them were planted at the same time, which was the 7th of April, and then they were planted out into the paddy on about the 17th of May. And these were put into pots at the same time. Now, that's very quick. That's very, very fast. That's very encouraging. So, yeah, those are the two varieties that we're playing with at the moment and the advantages so far of each. It's just coming on to rain, so I'm going to call it there. But yeah, that's the rice update. Very encouraging. Bearing in mind that neither type really needs to be grown in under glass. Both would do perfectly well outdoors here. The only limiting factor with rice is it's putting on a seed head is photoperiod dependent. It relies on the amount of light and the amount of darkness. I know people have difficulties with that in various places in the world. And the stuff in the greenhouse is getting exactly the same amount of light as plants that are grown directly outside. There's no artificial light, there's no artificial darkness for that matter. The photoperiod is exactly the same there as it is in the paddy field. The possible exception would be plants in the window of the house, which is another reason that they're possibly a bit further along. Because it's not quite south, it's more southeast facing. As the sun comes around, it will get relative darkness a bit earlier than elsewhere on the croft. So that's possibly a factor there, but the stuff in the greenhouse are getting exactly the same light. So yeah, that's very, very encouraging. Obviously I'll do another update once we've got a bit more to report, but so far I'd say it's a pretty safe bet that yeah, you should be able to grow some sort of rice across most of the UK.